It was late in the rainy season of 1983 when my three-man special operations team received an unexpected order that changed everything we had planned for the week. We had spent 2 days preparing to infiltrate a suspected Khmer Rouge supply point hidden somewhere west of Kampong Thom. Intelligence believed the enemy had abandoned the area, but no one trusted old reports in Cambodia. The jungle changed every day. A trail that looked deserted in the morning could become an ambush site by sunset. Our mission sounded simple: move silently, confirm whether the camp still existed, mark its location on the map, and withdraw without making contact. As members of a Vietnamese special operations unit, avoiding a firefight was often considered a greater success than winning one. There were 4 of us. Sergeant Wah led the team. He had served longer than any of us and carried himself with the calm confidence that only years of combat could teach. He rarely raised his voice, but every decision he made carried weight. His enlistment was almost over, and he often joked that the first thing he would do after returning home was sleep for an entire week. Hai was our radio operator. He could fix almost any field radio with little more than a screwdriver and patience. Hanging from his belt was an old dented canteen that had belonged to his father, who had fought years before him. He refused to replace it, saying every dent had its own story. Then there was Kai, the youngest man on the team, barely 20 years old. He carried a small notebook wrapped in plastic. Whenever we stopped for a short break, he liked sketching giant trees or distant hills. He dreamed of studying art once the war finally ended. As for me, I was responsible for navigation. The folded military map stayed inside my shirt to protect it from rain, while the compass rarely left my hand. In those forests, one careless turn could leave a team wandering for days. Our packs were light but carried everything we truly needed: dehydrated rice, water purification tablets, spare socks, hammock tarps, medical supplies, extra ammunition, and enough batteries to keep Hai's radio alive for several nights. We moved before sunrise. The jungle swallowed us almost immediately. Moist earth clung to our boots with every step. Thick vines brushed against our sleeves. Mosquitoes buzzed endlessly around our faces despite the insect repellent. Every few hundred yards we paused, listening to the sounds of the forest before taking another step. Nobody talked unless necessary. Hours passed that way. Shortly after noon, I noticed something that did not belong on our map. A narrow footpath crossed our route. It wasn't an animal trail. The vegetation had been pushed aside by human feet. Though not recently, fallen leaves covered most of the ground, but underneath I could still make out faint footprints hardened into the mud. I crouched and signaled for Sergeant Wah. He studied the trail without speaking. Hai checked the map again while Kai scanned the trees through his binoculars. The path should not have existed. According to our intelligence, there was nothing in this direction except untouched jungle. If someone made this trail, Wah whispered, they were trying to reach something. That single sentence changed our mission. Instead of heading toward the suspected supply camp, we turned north and began following the forgotten path. None of us knew that decision would lead us to one of the most haunting discoveries of our entire time in Cambodia. A place that would stay with me far longer than any firefight ever could. And before the afternoon was over, the forest itself would begin warning us that something was terribly wrong. The farther we followed that forgotten trail, the more the jungle seemed to close behind us. Sergeant Wah raised 2 fingers, and we spread out without a word. I moved on the left, Kai on the right, Hai in the center with the radio tucked tight against his chest. We kept about 10 yards between each man, close enough to see hand signals, far enough that one burst of fire would not take all of us down. The path was narrow, almost swallowed by weeds, but it had once been used often. I could tell by the way the earth had hardened under the leaves. Here and there, old cuts scarred the trunks where someone had cleared vines with a machete. They were not fresh cuts. The bark had grown dark around them, like old wounds that never quite healed. By then the sun was high, but little light reached the ground. The air smelled of wet soil, rotting leaves, and something sour I could not name. Sweat ran down my back under my pack. My shirt stuck to my skin. Mosquitoes gathered around my ears in angry little clouds. We had marched through many forests in Cambodia, but this place felt different. There were no birds. That was what I noticed first. No monkeys crashing through branches. No squirrels. No small animals running through the brush. Only the soft crush of our boots, the creak of our gear, and the slow dripping of water from leaves left wet by last night's rain. Wah stopped near a fallen tree and motioned us down. We crouched in the mud. Hyde turned the radio dial slowly, trying to catch the signal window we had agreed on before leaving the main unit. The set hissed and popped. Nothing clear came through. He adjusted the antenna, then shook his head. Too low here, he whispered. Maybe terrain, maybe weather. Wah looked at me. I unfolded the map carefully, keeping it low against my knee. The paper was soft from humidity despite the plastic cover. I checked the compass, then the trail, then the surrounding slopes. According to the map, we were standing in empty forest. No village, no road, no marked water source. That troubled me more than any gunfire. In special operations, you learned not to fear what you could see. You feared what did not make sense. Kai was the youngest, but he had sharp eyes. While the rest of us studied the terrain, he pointed toward a clump of roots beside the path. At first I thought he had spotted wire or a trip signal. I slid closer, slowly parting the grass with the tip of my knife. It was a child's sandal. Small, cracked, half buried in the damp earth. None of us spoke. A sandal in the jungle could mean many things. Refugees, forced labor, a family passing through years before. But there was something about that tiny shape lying alone among the roots that tightened my chest. Hai reached for his dented canteen, took a small sip, then passed it to Kai without being asked. Kai drank, but his eyes stayed on the sandal. Wah studied the trail ahead. His face did not change, but I knew him well enough to see that he was thinking hard. Our original mission had been to confirm an enemy supply point. Now we were following a path that was not on any map. In a dead quiet forest, with a strange smell growing stronger every 100 yards. Wah finally gave the hand signal to move. We rose slowly. From that moment, none of us treated the trail as abandoned anymore. Every vine could hide a wire. Every tree could hide a watcher. Every patch of mud could tell us whether someone had passed before us. We moved so slowly that an hour felt like a whole afternoon. Then, just as the path dipped toward a darker patch of forest, Kai froze again. This time he was not looking at the ground. He was staring ahead, where the trees opened slightly and the air seemed heavier. The sour smell came from there. At first, we made the wrong guess. That happened more often than people think. In war stories, men always seem to understand danger the moment they see it. Real life was not like that. Real life was sweat in your eyes, mud on your boots, a damp map in your hands, and too many questions with no clean answers. When we reached the darker patch of forest, the trail widened a little. The trees thinned just enough for us to see the remains of what had once been a small settlement. Not a proper village, maybe 5 or 6 huts at most. The jungle had already taken most of it back. A few blackened posts still stood in the ground. Parts of bamboo walls lay collapsed under vines. We found pieces of broken pottery, a rusted cooking pot, and the frame of a woven sleeping mat almost buried beneath wet leaves. Near one old fire pit, Kai picked up a small strip of cloth, faded white, torn at one end. For several minutes, none of us touched anything else. Sergeant Wah studied the area carefully. He pointed to the hut frames, then to the trail we had followed in. People lived here, he whispered. Hai nodded. Maybe they ran when the fighting came through. That was the first conclusion we accepted. It was reasonable. In Cambodia, we had seen empty hamlets before. Some were abandoned because of shelling. Some because families fled from Pol Pot forces. Some because hunger pushed people from one place to another until even the idea of home became something temporary. But something here did not fit. There were no shell craters, no bullet marks in the remaining posts, no scattered cartridges, no torn uniforms, nothing that looked like a firefight. The place felt less like it had been attacked and more like it had been erased. Wah ordered us to search in pairs, quietly, no more than 20 yards apart. I went with Kai toward the remains of a hut near a large tree with roots rising out of the ground like old knuckles. He moved lightly, careful not to step on anything that might tell a story. For all his youth, Kai had a gentle way around the belongings of civilians. He once told me his mother had lost everything in an air raid years earlier. And since then he could not look at broken household things without thinking of her. Under a sheet of rotten palm leaves, we found 3 bowls stacked together. One was cracked clean down the middle. Beside them lay a wooden spoon, still shaped by a human hand, though the wood had gone soft with age. Kai looked at it for a long time. Somebody thought they would come back for this, he said. I did not answer. A soldier learns to carry silence like another piece of equipment. Sometimes it weighs more than ammunition. Behind us, Hai was still fighting with the radio. The signal came in broken pieces, mostly static. He cursed under his breath, then apologized to the machine as if it were a stubborn water buffalo. Even Wah almost smiled at that, but only for a second. Then the sour smell returned. It was stronger near the rear edge of the settlement, where thorn vines had grown thick between 2 trees. Flies moved there in small black clouds. Not many, but enough. Wah signaled us to stop. He crouched, pushed aside a curtain of vines with the barrel of his rifle, and looked down at the ground. I saw his shoulders stiffen. There, half hidden by leaves, was a circle of stones. At first, I thought it was another cooking pit. Then I saw the old rope, dark and rotten, hanging over the side. It was a well. The mouth was covered by vines, leaves, and years of neglect. The stones around it were slick with moss. No one had drawn water from it in a long time. Wah did not move for several seconds. Then he turned to me and pointed 2 fingers toward the well. I stepped forward, already feeling that our first guess had been wrong. Sergeant Wah made a slow fist, and all of us froze. The well sat behind the abandoned huts like something the forest had tried to hide. Vines crossed over it in thick ropes. Leaves had gathered across the mouth, damp and black. Moss covered the ring of stones. If the smell had not led us there, we might have walked past it without knowing. Wah pointed at me, then at the far side of the well. I nodded. Kai stayed back to cover the trail. Hai knelt beside a tree with the radio, one hand on the handset, the other resting near his rifle. His face had lost its usual joking look. Even before we saw what was inside, every man in that small clearing knew we had found something bad. Wah and I began cutting the vines. We worked slowly, using knives instead of pulling by hand. In our work, even an old vine could hide a tripwire. Every movement had to be careful. The jungle was quiet around us. Too quiet. I remember hearing my own breathing inside my ears. A piece of vine snapped, and a cloud of flies rose from the opening. The smell hit us hard. I turned my face away and swallowed. Wah did not move. He only lowered his head for a second, then kept cutting. When enough vines had been cleared, I leaned forward and aimed my flashlight down into the well. For a moment, my mind refused to understand what my eyes were seeing. There was no water, only bones. Skulls lay at the bottom, piled together with ribs, arms, scraps of cloth, and pieces of old rope. Some were half covered by mud. Some stared upward with empty sockets. as if the last thing they had seen was the circle of sky above the well. The beam of my flashlight shook in my hand. I had seen dead men before. Soldiers see things that no young man should ever have to see. But this was different. This was not battle. This was not men dying with rifles in their hands. This was a place where people had been thrown away. Wah looked down beside me. His jaw tightened. He removed his helmet slowly and held it against his chest. I had served with him long enough to know that gesture meant more than any words. Behind us, Hai stood up. He took 2 steps toward the well, saw what was inside, and stopped as if someone had struck him. The radio handset slipped from his hand and swung against his leg by the cord. Kai came closer last. He was young, too young for that sight. He looked into the well for only a few seconds, then backed away and sat on a root. His small notebook stuck out from the pocket of his shirt, but he did not touch it. For once, there was nothing he wanted to draw. Nobody spoke. In the distance, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the trees. The air grew heavier. Rain was coming, but none of us moved to set up our hammock tarps or protect the map. We just stood there around that well, 4 armed men trained for dangerous missions, suddenly useless in the face of what Pon Pot had left behind. I thought of the broken bowls we had found, the child's sandal, the wooden spoon, ordinary things, human things. They had belonged to people who once cooked meals, carried water, slept under roofs, and hoped to see another morning. War teaches soldiers to count distance, ammunition, time, and risk. That day, it taught me there were losses no man could count. Wah finally put his helmet back on. "We report this," he whispered. Before Hai could answer, the radio cracked with static. Then a broken voice came through, urgent and hard to hear. "Team 3, enemy movement, near your sector, do not expose position." Hai lifted the handset with trembling fingers. Wah looked at the well, then toward the dark trail beyond the trees. Our mission had changed again. Hai pressed the handset against his ear, trying to pull the broken message out of the static. The radio hissed like rain on hot metal. His lips moved silently as he repeated the words to himself, making sure he understood them before passing them to Sergeant Wah. "Command says enemy movement near our sector," he whispered. "Small group, maybe patrol. They don't know our exact position, but they're close." Wah looked at the well again. For a moment, his eyes stayed on the dark opening, and I knew what he was thinking. We had found proof of something terrible, but proof meant nothing if we died beside it before anyone else could come. He motioned us into cover. Kai slipped behind the remains of a hut, his rifle low but ready. Hai crawled back under a fallen tree, keeping the radio wrapped against his chest to muffle any accidental noise. I moved beside Wah to the edge of the clearing, where the trail bent toward thicker brush. The jungle had gone still again. That kind of stillness could break a man's nerves. You listened so hard that every drop of water sounded like a footstep. Every insect seemed too loud. My fingers tightened around my rifle, not because I wanted to fire, but because holding something solid kept my hands from shaking. Wah signaled with 2 fingers, "Observe. Do not engage." That was our new mission now. We had to confirm whether Pon Pot forces still used this place. Then report the location of the well and withdraw unseen. A firefight would bring more enemy fighters. Worse, it might destroy the very site we needed to protect. Minutes passed. Then I saw it. A branch moved where no wind touched it. A man stepped through the trees, thin and dark-clothed, carrying an AK at waist height. 2 more followed behind him. They were not regular troops in formation. They moved like men who knew the forest and trusted it too much. One had a cloth band tied around his head. Another carried a small sack over his shoulder. They stopped near the abandoned huts. One of them pointed toward the well. My mouth went dry. Until then, a part of me had hoped the killers were long gone. that this place was only an old scar left behind by the war. But those men knew the clearing. They did not look surprised by the huts, the stones, or the vines around the well. They moved as if returning to a place they had visited before. Kai shifted slightly behind the hut. A tiny piece of rotten bamboo cracked under his knee. The sound was small, no louder than a twig breaking under a bird, but in that dead forest, it carried. The nearest Pon Pot fighter turned his head. Hoa's hand came down slowly, telling everyone to hold. My heart beat so hard I could feel it in my throat. Kai froze where he was. Hai's eyes were wide, but he kept one hand over the radio speaker so it would not betray us with another burst of static. The fighter stared into the trees for a long moment. Then he raised his AK and took a step toward Kai's position. I had a clear shot. One squeeze, and I could drop him, but the other two would scatter, fire blindly, call more men, and the whole jungle would wake up around us. Our mission would be gone. Maybe our team too. Wa did not look at me, but his hand told me the answer. Wait. It was the hardest order a soldier can obey. The man took another step. Then thunder rolled again, closer this time. A sheet of rain began falling through the canopy, sudden and heavy. Leaves shook under the downpour. The sound covered everything. The fighter lowered his weapon, said something to the others, and they turned back toward the trail. We watched them disappear into the wet green darkness. Only after they were gone did Wa breathe out. But none of us felt saved. Now we knew the truth. The well was not just a forgotten crime scene. It was still inside enemy ground. We waited until the rain softened their footsteps into nothing. Sergeant Wa did not move right away. That was one of the reasons I trusted him. A frightened man runs the moment danger turns its back. A trained man waits to see whether danger is truly gone. For nearly 10 minutes, we stayed hidden among the broken huts and wet roots. Rain drummed on leaves above us and ran down our helmets in thin streams. Mud crept into my sleeves. My fingers had gone stiff around the rifle. Finally, Wa signaled us together. We leave no trace, he whispered. Same route for 50 yards. Then cut east. That sounded simple. Nothing in that forest was simple anymore. Hai tried the radio again. The set crackled once, then faded into static. He shook his head. His face had turned gray, and beads of sweat stood on his upper lip even though rain was pouring over us. I touched his shoulder. You all right? Just cold, he said. But I knew that look. I had seen it before in men who were about to be taken by malaria. 1 minute they were walking. The next, their teeth were chattering so hard they could not hold a cup. Wa saw it too. We move slow, he said. Hai tried to smile. I can still carry the radio. No one said you couldn't, Wa replied. That small mercy mattered. In the field, pride could keep a man standing for another mile. Kai went first, brushing away tracks with a leafy branch as we withdrew. He had stopped looking like the young artist who once sketched hills during rest breaks. His eyes were sharp now, too sharp, as if the well had aged him in a single afternoon. I followed behind Hai. Every few steps his breathing changed. He kept one arm wrapped around the radio, protecting it from rain with a piece of poncho. That machine was our only voice back to the unit. Without it, the well might remain hidden and our team might disappear into the same jungle that had swallowed so many others. We had gone less than 100 yards when Hai stumbled. He caught himself against a tree, but the movement was too loud. Somewhere behind us, a bird burst from the canopy. Then another. Wa raised his fist. We froze. Voices came from the direction of the settlement. The Pon Pot patrol had either heard something or decided to return. Wa looked at the map in my hand, then at the slope ahead. The east route dropped into a shallow ravine. It was muddy, steep, and not marked clearly, but it might hide us from view. Then Hai's knees buckled. I grabbed him before he fell. His skin burned under my hand. His teeth began to chatter, and he was trying hard not to make sound. The radio bumped against his chest, heavy and slick with rain. Hoa's eyes met mine. For a moment, the choice stood between us as clearly as if someone had written it on the wet ground. We could move fast and complete the mission, reach higher ground, send the report, bring help back to the well. Or we could slow down for Hai, risk being overtaken, and maybe lose everything. In war, men talk about duty like it is a clean word. Out there, duty often came covered in mud and fear. Hua did not give the order right away. Maybe he was waiting for me to say what he already knew. Hai was my responsibility now. I had walked behind him. I had caught him. I could not let him drop. I slung my rifle across my back and pulled Hai's arm over my shoulder. "I'll carry him," I whispered. Hai tried to push me away. "No, the radio." "You carry the radio," I said. "I carry you." Kai looked back from the ravine. For the first time that day, I saw his face soften. Hua nodded once. "Then we all go slower," he said. Behind us, branches cracked. The patrol was coming back. The ravine saved us, but it did not make the retreat easier. Kai slid down first, almost disappearing into the wet brush below. Sergeant Hua followed, moving backward for a few steps so he could watch the trail behind us. I came next with Hai's arm across my shoulder, his weight dragging on my left side. The mud gave way under my boots, and we half walked, half fell into the ravine. Hai bit down on his sleeve to keep his teeth from chattering too loudly. That was the kind of courage people rarely talk about. Not charging forward, not shouting, just forcing your own sick body to stay quiet so your brothers could live. The rain kept falling hard. It washed away some of our tracks, but it also turned the ground into a trap. Every step made a sucking sound. Leeches clung to our socks. Thorn vines tore at our sleeves. My back burned from the weight of my pack, rifle, and Hai's body leaning against me. Behind us, voices moved along the upper trail. The Pon Pot patrol was close. Hua gave us a sharp hand signal. "Stop." We dropped behind a fallen log. Kai crawled back and used a branch to pull leaves over the marks our boots had left in the mud. He worked fast, but not carelessly. Every motion was controlled. His young face was covered in rain and dirt, yet his hands stayed steady. The voices passed above us. One of the men laughed. That sound bothered me more than anger would have. It was too normal, too human. A man could laugh in the same forest where a well full of skulls waited behind him. War had taught me many bitter lessons, but that one cut deep. Hai's radio suddenly gave a faint click. He clamped both hands over it. We all froze. For 3 seconds, nobody breathed. The men above stopped talking. Hua slowly raised his rifle. I saw Kai do the same from the other side of the log. I could feel Hai trembling against me, not from fear alone, but from fever burning through him. Then the rain grew heavier, pounding on the leaves like handfuls of gravel. The patrol moved on. Hua waited again, always waiting, always measuring danger by seconds. When he finally signaled us forward, I pulled Hai up and we kept moving through the ravine. We did not run. Running gets men killed in the jungle. We moved with discipline, step by step, using the rain, the slope, and the darkness under the trees. Kai went ahead to check for open ground. Hua stayed behind us, covering the rear. I carried Hai as far as I could, then let him walk 3 steps, then carried him again. He whispered once, "Leave me if you have to." I almost got angry. Instead, I said, "Save your breath." He gave a weak laugh, still bossy. That small laugh nearly broke me. By late afternoon, we reached a low rise where the radio signal improved. Hai was barely standing, but when Hua told him to transmit, he straightened like a man on parade. His hands shook as he raised the antenna. Static answered first. Then a voice. Team 3, this is base. Send report. Hai looked at Wah. Wah looked at me, then at Kai, then toward the forest we had crawled out of. I gave the coordinates from the wet map. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Calm, flat, as if I were reporting a broken bridge instead of a well filled with the dead. Wah added the enemy movement, patrol size, and route. He requested a protection team and medical support. When the transmission ended, none of us cheered. We had escaped. We had completed the mission. Hai was still alive. But back in that silent clearing, the well remained. And I understood then that some missions do not end when you reach safety. Some follow you out of the jungle and keep marching beside you for the rest of your life. We returned to the well 3 days later. By then Hai's fever had gone down, though his face still looked hollow and pale. The medic wanted to keep him behind, but Hai refused. He said he was the one who had carried the report out through the rain, and he wanted to see it finished. Sergeant Wah did not argue. He only made him walk in the middle of the formation, where we could watch him. This time, we were not alone. A small protection unit moved with us, along with 2 officers assigned to record the site and several local Cambodians who knew the area. They were thin people, quiet people, the kind who had learned to speak softly because loud voices had once brought punishment. One old man carried a cloth bag against his chest. A woman walked barefoot, her eyes fixed on the trail as if she were afraid the forest might change its mind and hide the place again. The jungle looked different in daylight with more men around us, but it did not feel safer. Every tree seemed familiar. Every bend in the trail pulled my memory back to that first afternoon. The child's sandal, the broken bowls, the sour smell, the silence without birds. When we reached the abandoned settlement, nobody spoke. The officers marked the old hut frames. The protection unit spread out along the perimeter. Kai stood beside me, holding his rifle across his chest. He kept looking toward the well, then away from it, then back again. The vines we had cut were still hanging over the stones, brown and wet. Flies rose when the first officer stepped close. He covered his nose with a cloth but did not turn away. I had thought that seeing it a second time might make it less terrible. I was wrong. The skulls were still there. The bones were still there. The well still held its dark silence as if it had been waiting for witnesses all those years. The old Cambodian man came forward slowly. At first the officers tried to stop him, but he lifted one trembling hand and said something in Khmer. I did not understand the words, but I understood his face. Wah asked the interpreter, and the interpreter spoke quietly. He says his family lived near here. The old man opened the cloth bag. Inside were a few objects wrapped in another piece of fabric, a broken bracelet, a wooden bead, and a small strip of blue cloth. He had carried them, he said, because they were the only things left from his daughter. He looked toward the well but did not step closer. The barefoot woman began to cry without making a sound. Tears ran down her cheeks, but her mouth stayed closed. That quiet crying was harder to hear than screaming. As the officers worked, more signs appeared around the settlement. A shallow pit behind one hut, another under a cluster of bamboo, scraps of clothing tangled in roots, a child's metal cup pressed into the mud. The crime was not only in the well. The whole place had been used for death. Kai found the bracelet near the base of a tree. It was small, made from dull metal, bent out of shape. He picked it up carefully with 2 fingers and placed it on a clean cloth beside the other recovered items. His hands shook after he set it down. I wanted to say something to him, but there are moments when words only make a man feel more alone. So I stood beside him in silence. That day, I understood that our mission had not been about a map point or an enemy patrol. It was about making sure the dead were no longer hidden. It was about standing witness when the people who had suffered could not speak for themselves. Before we left, Wah removed his helmet again. This time, all of us did the same. We finished the report before sunset, but none of us felt finished. The officers wrote down coordinates, counted what they could, and sealed recovered objects in cloth and paper. The protection unit stayed alert around the clearing. A few Cambodian villagers remained near the old huts, standing together without speaking much. I remember the smell of wet earth, the hum of insects returning after rain, and the way the evening light touched the stones around the well. Then Sergeant Wah gave the order to move out. We walked away in silence. That silence followed us for days. Special operations teams are usually close in a noisy way. Men joke to keep fear from settling too deep. Hai, especially, could talk about anything: bad rice, leeches, radio batteries, even the shape of clouds. But after the well, his jokes became rare. He still carried the radio, still checked the antenna, still cleaned the contacts with the care of a watchmaker. Yet something inside him had gone quiet. Kai changed too. Before that mission, whenever we stopped to rest, he would open his small notebook and sketch hills, trees, water buffalo, the curve of a hammock between two trunks. He used a short pencil he kept wrapped in plastic, sharpened with his knife until it was no longer than his little finger. After the well, he still opened the notebook. But he no longer drew landscapes. He drew roots. Twisted roots, broken posts, empty trails, a circle of stones. Once I saw him sketch the child's sandal from memory. He noticed me looking and closed the notebook quickly, as if I had caught him doing something shameful. I said nothing. There are things a man must put somewhere, or they eat him from the inside. Hai's fever came and went. At night, when we strung our hammock tarps between trees, I could hear his teeth clicking softly in the dark. I would pass him water from my canteen, and he would wave me off, saying he was fine. He was never fine. None of us were. The jungle nights continued as they always had. Crickets screamed, leaves moved in the wind. Somewhere far away, artillery thumped like a door closing in another world. We ate dehydrated rice with rainwater, cleaned mud from our boots, checked the map, checked the compass, checked the radio, and prepared for the next mission. War does not stop because you have seen something terrible. That was one of its cruelties. A man could stand beside a wall full of skulls in the morning and be ordered to recon another trail by evening. He could carry sorrow in one pocket and ammunition in the other. He could remember a barefoot woman crying without sound, then crawl through mud before dawn because the next duty was waiting. One night, about a week later, we camped on a low ridge overlooking a dark valley. The air smelled of damp leaves and wood smoke from some unseen village. Hai took a few wildflowers he had picked beside the trail and tied them together with a thread from his sleeve. At first I thought he was joking again. But before we left the next morning, he walked back alone toward the direction of the old settlement. Wah saw him and let him go only a short distance, then followed at a careful gap. When Hai returned, his hands were empty. He did not explain. He did not have to. I knew he had placed those flowers somewhere along the path toward the well, as close as he could safely get. For years afterward, whenever I heard rain fall on leaves, I thought of that small bundle of flowers lying in the wet forest. A soldier's poor offering to people whose names we never learned. I am an old man now, and most mornings I wake before sunrise for no reason at all. My wife says it is habit. Maybe she is right. Soldiers learn to wake before the day does. Even after the uniform is folded away, some part of the body still waits for orders, for distant footsteps, for a radio cracking in the dark. The war ended for me many years ago, but that well in the forest never really left. After Cambodia, life moved forward because life always does. Sergeant Wah finally returned home. He became quieter with age, but he still had that same steady look in his eyes. When we met years later, he did not talk much about medals or operations. He talked about his grandchildren, about repairing the roof of his house, about the price of rice. But when rain began falling on the tin roof, both of us fell silent at the same time. We did not need to explain why. Kai kept his promise to himself. He became an art teacher after leaving the army. Once, he sent me a drawing by mail. It showed a dirt trail disappearing into thick trees. No soldiers, no weapons, just the trail, the roots, and a small circle of stones half hidden in shadow. On the back he wrote, "Some places must be remembered gently." I still keep that drawing folded inside an old book. Hai did not live as long as the rest of us. The fever that nearly took him in the ravine was not the last illness he carried home. He survived the war, married, had a daughter, and worked repairing radios in a small shop. That suited him. He always understood machines better than men. But his health was never strong again. When he died, his wife gave me the dented canteen he had carried through the jungle. I did not want to take it at first. It felt too personal, too heavy for such a small thing. But she put it in my hands and said, "He told me you would know why." She was right. The canteen sits on my desk today. The metal is dull. One side is badly dented from some fall I no longer remember. The cap does not close tightly anymore. A younger man might throw it away. But I never could. When I touch it, I remember Hai's hand covering the radio speaker in the ravine. I remember him shaking with fever but refusing to let go of that machine. I remember him tying wildflowers with thread from his sleeve. That is what war leaves behind, not only scars, not only names carved on stone, but ordinary objects that become too full of memory to put down. People sometimes ask me if I am proud of what we did in those years. I never know how to answer quickly. I am proud of my comrades. Proud of Hoa's calm, Kai's quiet heart, Hai's stubborn courage. I am proud that we did not leave that well hidden in the forest. I am proud that, at least for one forgotten clearing, the dead were found and witnessed. But I am not proud of war. War is where young men learn old sadness too soon. It is where a child's sandal can stop 4 armed soldiers in their tracks. It is where completing the mission and saving your friend can feel like 2 roads splitting under your feet. When I close my eyes, I can still smell the wet earth of that forest. I can still hear rain striking leaves above the ravine. I can still see Sergeant Waugh removing his helmet beside the well. And all of us following him. Because there was nothing else we could give. The canteen stays on my desk, dented and unpolished. I keep it that way on purpose. Some memories should not be cleaned until they shine.